And today it's the 1974 Canadian penny, and I chose this one to open up with because this one has all the fall colors in it. You can see the reds and the purples, kind of the violets. You can see all the different shades of brown. And by 1974, the Canadian penny certainly was in its fall. The maple leaf first came out on the Canadian pennies in 1920. And this is one of the original versions of the Canadian 1-cent coin. And notice here that it says 1, O-N-E, cent, much like the United States 1-cent coin. And later, of course, it changed to the numeral 1 cent. But in 1920, this first came out, and this stayed this way until 1936. In 1937, they moved to the more modern maple leaf. And this is a George Kruger Gray engraving. And you see that it says 1 cent, so they moved from the O-N-E cent to the number 1 cent, and they moved from the 2 maple leaves on each side to 1 maple sprig in the center with 2 leaves on it. And of course the date went from the bottom to the side here. Canada from the top to the bottom here. And of course they changed the fronts in 1937. So until 1930, from 1920 until 1936, the small penny had George V on it, and here he is, George V, by the grace of God, King and Emperor or Imperator of India. In 1937, they changed the back, and then Queen Elizabeth's father, George VI, became the king. And this one says, George VI, by the grace of God, King and Emperor of India. And remember that India was part of Great Britain until 1948, when India achieved its independence. This is a Thomas Humphrey Paget engraving, and you can see the H and a P right down there. Hard to tell it's an H and a P, but if you know that it is, you can see the H and the P down there. George VI was on the front of these coins until 1953, when Queen Elizabeth became queen, and her image was put on the front of the coin. King George VI faced left, Queen Elizabeth faced to the right. Here's Queen Elizabeth. This is the Mary Gillick coin. Again, it's the penny. Again, it has the geared outer rim. Again, it says Elizabeth II, Dia Gratia. So rather than DG, it says Dia Gratia Regina. And of course they had a lot of extra space because in 1948 India became independent, so by the time Queen Elizabeth became queen, you could just put Regina. And of course Rex means king, Regina means queen, and on the back, guess what, they just kept the George Kruger Gray design. From 1953, when this coin was made, until 2012, the Canadian penny had the maple leaf reverse on it. So 1974 was kind of right in the middle of Queen Elizabeth's reign on the Canadian penny. So 1974 was the 22nd year. They went on to leave the maple leaf on it until 2012. So another 38 years after this, the maple leaf was still on the Canadian penny. Now, in 1974, the Canadian penny was full on, and we used to get them in the United States all the time in our change. Now, the Canadian penny is not worth quite as much as the United States penny. The Canadian dollar is, let's say, 80% of the United States dollar. When we get these pennies, we would just keep using them. It turns out that there's more than a penny's worth of metal in these. These are a bronze coin, 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. In 1974, they made 692 million of these coins. In Canada, the coins are only made at the 1 mint. This coin was made at the Royal Mint. This was before the Winnipeg Mint came online. So in 1974, all the pennies were made at the Royal Mint in Ottawa. Of the 694 million pennies they made in 1974, the highest grade that they found to date is in Mint State 67, and those go for about $687. So you can get a really, really valuable Canadian coin. There are also a number of error coins or clip planchets and other varieties, and you can look through those. This one doesn't have any of the die chips, doesn't have any of the partial colors, is not off center. This one just got used and used well for about 38 years before it was taken offline. And here's the coloring on the front. Just great patina. I wish I didn't have quite so much dirt in there, but the coloring on the front's also spectacular too. All right. If you're looking for these Canadian pennies, they're still around. Ask your older relatives for some of the coins in their coin jars, especially if you live in New England or along the Canadian border, anywhere from Maine to Washington State. You'll find people that have these Canadian pennies in their change. All right. That's all we have today from DC Coinwell International Coin Channel. Try to collect the 1974 Canadian penny and look for all the Canadian pennies up through 2012.